Thank you for coming again today. Um, my name is Harvinder, as many of you know probably from yesterday and probably previous years. Um, I start with apologizing. Kind of yesterday we ran out of the food. Yesterday calculations was kind of mine calculations didn't work yesterday. We always kind of think 70% people gonna show up, but 95% turnout was great. So thank you. Next year we will fix it. So yeah, it's a good problem to have. Yes. But apologies required because some people didn't kind of get the food. So we fixed today. So we're not gonna run out of the food. Again, I'm gonna run quickly through the slides. Code of conduct. We didn't get any complaint yesterday, so thank you very much for that. Your professional behavior. Um, if you find any questions related to anything, find someone like me, in blue t-shirt, and they will answer questions for you. Survey, please respond back to the survey to how we can improve. Yes, I agree, food we need to improve on, but definitely this is one of the B sides that uh, provide kind of the warm food. If I'm not, because we are Edmonton, and Edmonton is the best, right? So we're gonna have three talk tracks. As you know, you attended yesterday as well. Workshop. We have two workshops running by Megan and Adam McMath. In I will explain in the later slides. But we have two workshops running. CTF. We running two CTFs. You already did the breakfast, so and I hope you enjoyed. Um, Lunch 12:30 to 1:30, and then there is a crypto challenge. If you didn't do yesterday, there is still time to do today on the badge. Thank you to our sponsors, gold sponsors. Thank you. This is not we were able to make the decision quickly to increase the food. Just because of you. Thank you very much. Optiv, Zscaler, Palo Alto, Veeam are gold sponsors. Silver sponsors: MNP, Kips, Epic, Glass House Systems, Commvault, Netscope, and Longview. Thank you very much. And then bronze sponsors: CGI, Cisco, and Recorded Future. The CTF sponsors are NCL, Security Innovation, Hack5, and TCMSec. Um, Thanks to Hackerware to make these cool badges. So as you know, that in the pick main floor, track one, you are sitting in. Then CTF and sponsors are in Atrium. Pick Build Production Productivity and Innovation Center, second floor. Track three is in 232, and track two is in 233. Next time I'm going to switch because 232 make and sense a little bit better. But um, as you can see on the maps, if you want to go to track 233, and track 33 in 232, and workshops on pick 234. So now we have community partners, Diana Initiative. Anyone is here from Diana Initiative, DDI? Okay. Nicole, the best volunteer we have in Edmonton. So she runs the Diana Initiative. You probably saw her, helping you with the registrations. So um, they host an annual diversity-driven conference in Las Vegas during Hacker Summer Camp. That is committed to helping all underrepresented people in information security. So if you want to attend a really cool event, this is one of the events outside of Edmonton. University of Calgary. So is there any representative from UFC? No? Okay. So University of Calgary Continuing Education is partnering with the B-side Edmonton to provide high quality educational opportunities for lifelong learners regionally and globally, thereby empowering people and transforming communities for a better future. Isaka. Okay, I'm going to speak about them as well. So Isaka Edmonton chapter. Most of people I saw in, already a member of Isaka chapter. But if you're not, it's a really nice chapter. They do monthly events, really informative sessions. Maybe you Google Isaka Edmonton chapter, so and join them. Is there any in SecM? Well, we have to be better organized next year. INSECAM is a non-for-profit organization founded in 2017, the suggestion of National Research Council Canada. And INSECAM brings together key players in cybersecurity ecosystem and play the role of intermediary between organizations that have cybersecurity needs and those what have the solution. Yeah, exact. Is Donald here? I saw Donald. Render, you want to speak for YEXEC? No. So I am also a YEXEC member. YEXEC is a Slack group, basically. Um, I was one of the earliest members from 2016. It's a local volunteer, community-driven, information security focused group. Really cool group. You can put any question there. There will be an answer from someone. If you want to sell anything related to security or network, there are buyers you're gonna find there. Uh, so it's really cool group. I would recommend everybody, like if you are um, member of information security group, or you want to be pursue a career in information security, yagsec.ca is a really cool way to start knowing your community basically in Edmonton. I see too. So Cherry, okay, finally we have someone.
Good morning, everyone. We are from ISC to Alberta chapter. Hope I'm audible now. Okay. So, my name is Cherry, and I'm with my colleague Karen here. We are representing ISC to Alberta chapter here. ISC2, I guess everyone knows a little bit about it. ISC2 provides education, certifications in information security. And our main goal is to connect cybersecurity in business and provide in whole Alberta. So there are various certifications provided by ISC2 like CISSP, SSLP, CCSP, HCISPP. There is one program run by IIC2 Alberta, Safe and Secure Online. If you want, please check our website. Anyone can request this. It's for parents, guardians, for children, and everyone. There are few in-person events that were conducted by IIC2 last year. There were two networking events, and there was a very one cool seminar series run in Concordia University by Dr. Aslam and Mr. Sean Thompson. There was one ISC2 Alberta chapter as well in Concordia University. We are a proud members of BSides Edmonton since its inception in 2018 and proudly supporting BSides Calgary as well. So if you want to know more or want to be a member of it, please visit our website. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cherry. Okay. We left Voices yesterday, so we're gonna give them stage. Shridevi, please come. So
Good morning, everyone. Okay. So most of you already aware of our booth here.
No.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so my name is Sridevi. I'm representing Vices Western Canada here, and I'm one of the founding and present board member. And we have Pooja and Chantal here from the board, and we also have so many volunteers here supporting us. Okay, so we are so excited to introduce you to Vices Western Canada. Uh, This stands for Women in Cybersecurity, and VICES is a global organization dedicated to advancing and empowering women in the cybersecurity field. It was founded with a mission to create a supportive community where women can connect, learn, and grow in cybersecurity field. So VICES offers incredible opportunities for networking, mentoring, and professional development. Whether you are a student, just started your career, or you are experienced professional, VICES provides resources, conferences, and workshops to help you advance in your cybersecurity career.
Uh, One of the things that makes WISIS unique is its focus on creating a diverse and inclusive cybersecurity workforce. By fostering a culture of inclusion, WISIS not only helps women succeed, but also strengthens. The WISIS Western Canada affiliate is a community of Western Canada women interested in cybersecurity.
So, our affiliate covers the region Alberta, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Yukon, and Northern Territories. As a VICES affiliate, our group organizes activities and events which promote recruitment, retention, and advancement of women in cybersecurity. So, if you're passionate about cybersecurity and want to be a part of community that supports and uplifts women in the world, we encourage you to get involved with VISIS. We believe that everyone is unique in their own way, and having a cybersecurity community, a strong cybersecurity community, definitely matters. So we encourage you to join us and support us. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja and Chantal. So, lastly, I would like to say big thanks to BSides committee to providing us this opportunity and requesting all of you to support VICES. I know we all experienced professional here. So try to find the way how we can support and encourage the newcomers into cybersecurity. We know we need a lot of people into cybersecurity. So I request you all to join us to support newcomers and VICES Western Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Shri Devi, Pooja, and Chantal. Um, so, with that, I'd like to welcome our MC for the morning, Will Pentland. So, Will, stage is yours.
Awesome. Thanks, Harvinder. Good morning, everybody. How we doing? All right, all right. Good morning. So I heard yesterday was really, really good. Unfortunately the flight was super delayed, but it sounds incredible that 500 people attended. So really excited, and I think day 2 here is another very exciting day to continue. Continue with the momentum. I'm Will Penn, and I'll be your MC for the morning. Thank you, Harvinder, for the opportunity. I didn't know you were a risk taker like this, but I also realize how popular you are. So this is a really awesome opportunity to be up here today. And yeah, I basically just want to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening this morning. So at first we'll have our keynote speaker, and then we'll start into track 1 here in the main room. And then there's 2 other tracks, as Harvinder mentioned as well. So starting off this morning with a bang, we've got Rajiv Gupta, who's the head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. I'd like to start with the CISO for Alberta, Martin, who wanted to do a quick overview. No? Okay. So I will do a quick overview. So basically the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, or the Cyber Centre, is mandated with protecting all of Canadian cybersecurity space, along with critical infrastructure and the government as a whole. So very excited to have Mr. Gupta here today. To give a bit of background, in his early days, he was a software engineer in the telecommunications sector before moving into the public sector. Once entering government, he has implemented a number of achievements over the course of his career, from being responsible for security architecture guidance to supply chain and cloud risk assessments for the Government of Canada, to implementing a cyber security risk mitigation framework for the telecommunications sector. His leadership then grew into the Director General of Cyber Defense Capabilities, overseeing the development of operation of sensors, threat discovery analytics, and autonomous defense technologies used to protect the Government of Canada networks industry. So without further ado, I'd like to please give a warm welcome to Mr. Rajiv Gupta.
All right, good. Well, super happy to be here. Nice big audience. So well done in getting everyone together. I mean, this is really what cybersecurity is all about. People getting together, sharing ideas. It is a big community, and that's the only way to really, solve the challenges that we have ahead of us. So Rajiv Gupta, I'm at the Cyber Center. Hopefully, how many people have heard of the Cyber Center in this room? Right on. So majority, really important, but message number one that I really have is, Cyber Center is out here. We were created in October 2018, so still relatively new and growing every single year. I mean, cybersecurity as a profession wasn't around when we all started. Well, when I started anyway, 30 years ago in high tech. So this is something new. Um, what I would like to say is that Cyber Center is under CSE, the Communication Security Establishment. So if you don't know what CSE is, it's responsible for foreign intelligence, cyber operations in foreign space, and then the Cyber Center, which is the technical authority for cybersecurity, as well as information assurance. So for us, information assurance means a lot of things in those words, and that's really crypt. So when you look at the cryptographic systems that we run, we've been doing this since World War II, so really important to us. We started as code makers and code breakers. And all of that, military equipment, all the satellites, all the tanks, all the airplanes, everything we do in theater and these sorts of things, that's all underpinned by crypt. Crypt is the essential layer for cybersecurity. It's your confidentiality and your integrity of all your connections, and that's near and dear to our hearts. So we have a really big crypt program that we do, and that's what we call information assurance. In terms of the technical authority for cybersecurity, Government of Canada, a lot of advice and guidance. So if you've seen our website, it's almost hard to find everything there, and that's something we're trying to solve in many ways. But we almost have a document on pretty much anything that's out there. But certainly happy to hear your feedback in terms of what's missing in that space and how to get this information to you better. Right, that's really one of our important messages. Lots of info. How do you consume it in a really, really useful way? I think the thing that really separates us as a cyber center from other countries around the world is that we're hands-on. So we are the Government Security Operations Center for the Government of Canada. So this is 100 plus departments that we're monitoring on a daily basis. So we basically eat our own dog food. We live it every single day. 1,000 plus incidents on the government side per year. And I think it was like 1,200 for critical infrastructure is what we dealt with last year. So busy every single day, seeing real incidents, responding to real incidents, having to defend ourselves from really every threat actor that's out there, because the government is a pretty good target. We have the state-sponsored threat actors, cyber criminals, and pretty much all the activists that are out there that want to do something against government. See a lot of it, and that's really what informs all our advice and guidance. When we were created in 2018, we came from a security and intelligence organization, so no one really knew who we were. So one of the big things that we wanted to do was, how do we communicate with Canadians? So we started with our national cyber threat assessment, and it wasn't just, talking what the landscape was. It's like, what do we see is going to happen in the next 2 years, so we can actually tell Canadians where we think the world is going, so you can actually make the right risk-based decisions. We've been doing that every couple of years. So 2018, 2020, the last one was 2022, and that was a look forward into 2023 and 2024. I'm still going to be covering those off, but we just finished drafting our look for the next 2 years as well. So I'll go a little bit into that space without, leaking exactly what we'll be putting out in October. But really, over the past few years, we've really changed the threat surface. I mean, the pandemic made everyone work from home. You used to have a perimeter around a network, and that was great. You had a gateway, and then, that's how your network worked. And then you added cloud, so the perimeter changed a bunch. And then you got a lot of remote connectivity. Everyone started working from home. Basically, your ingress, egress to your networks changed, and your threat surface changed greatly depending on whether you had managed devices or unmanaged devices. So definitely changed for defenders, but also changed a lot for attackers as well in terms of threat actors. Everything getting connected, right? So 5G pretty much here in Canada, Internet of Things, everything being connected. You look at industrial control systems, all the sensors that are out there, all the autonomy. Basically, there's huge efficiencies to be gained by connecting a lot of your operational systems to big analytic platforms in the cloud. It's kind of irresistible to folk, but that also changes your threat surface as well. Systems that should never have been connected to the internet are now connected to the internet, and maybe not with all the controls they really need, right? So definitely kind of a robustness gap in that space. Cybercrime really ramping up. Cyber criminals used to have to, make their own tools and be able to operate them. Now it's just a big ecosystem that I'll talk a bit about as we go. One that's really important and actually becoming even more important, and we saw that during the pandemic as well, is supply chain. And we saw that even recently with, CrowdStrike and others. Vendor concentrations are really critical. We don't even identify, we don't have the understanding as to what those concentrations are in our networks until something happens. That visibility is super important, but also the robustness of the different levels of our supply chain is incredibly important. You might think that that initial, service that you're actually getting is of a certain level, but what are the other 18 levels below that that are of differing levels that you don't understand, right? So very important to really understand that. Threat actors understand that, and often there's a one-to-many return on investment. So if you're looking at compromising a service provider, it might give you 1,000 targets if you're a threat actor. So these bigger service providers are becoming targets of opportunity, where different threat actors will actually provide more level of effort to actually get a bigger return on investment. I mean, we've seen, Microsoft compromised a couple of times in the past year, but not unique in the world anyway. This is happening against all big players out there. Geopolitical competition in cyberspace. This is something where countries, the battle lines aren't drawn exactly the same in cyber as they are with kinetic and other types of military activity. So because the norms haven't been established, countries think they can push the boundaries as to what's acceptable in cyberspace. I mean, things that we would see, in terms of even intrusions into critical infrastructure. Well, that would be a crime if it was done physically, but with cyber, it's kind of gray. It's still a crime, but very hard to prosecute, right? And countries think they can get away with that. So certainly we're seeing a lot of pressure, but also that kind of blurriness in terms of what the lines are does put us at risks because the norms haven't been properly established. And the last one I'll talk about is the internet, right? I mean, standards in general. People around the world, standards bodies govern our technologies, and this is what we've lived over the years. Standards get created, and we build technologies to suit them. Technology manufacturers drive the standards as well, as do countries. What do we want the internet to be in the future, right? So that gets determined by standards bodies. Do we want a free and open, information sharing platform, which is what it was originally created? Do you want something that's more interested in surveillance and censorship, right? Which the internet can also be used for, but that actually influences technical standards, and it actually influences some of our values and cultural norms as well. So important for us to understand. So some key judgments from a couple of years ago, I'll stretch them, going forward, and certainly they're all true, and all of our judgments underneath there are true as well. Most of our, actually, almost everything that we've predicted over our cyber threat assessment since 2018 have been pretty accurate. Ransomware is a persistent threat to Canadian organizations, and we predicted that would be the primary threat. Ransomware has grown basically in every level across Canada and in our partners as well. What we have seen is the sophistication of ransomware threat actors, changing their techniques as they go. It used to be, you encrypt the services so that people couldn't use their services. Then it changed to double extortion, where data would be stolen and then extortion would be applied to say, hey, we got to leak the data, as well as actually returning your services. A ransom would be asked for in Bitcoin or some other sort of digital currency. But we've seen the ecosystem really grow, right? I mean, ransomware as a service. Now you have like money laundering services, mixers that are out there. So you put a certain digital currency in, and you can blend it into many others just to make sure law enforcement will never be able to find these. You see like access as a service. You can buy access to different organizations, phishing as a service, buying fish kits. Pretty much it's all out there. You don't even have to be a software developer or even a cyber criminal. You just need a criminally minded business person to be able to put it all together and then run your business from some kind of safe haven country where prosecution isn't going to get you. And that's the reality as well, is that a lot of these cyber criminal groups operate out of, former Soviet states or other states where really the probability of prosecution is almost nil. Moving into, critical infrastructure, and this kind of ties into the point after it as well in terms of state-sponsored threat actors. CI is a target, right? When it was, 10 years ago, it was all about intellectual property theft was a lot of what we saw. Well, critical infrastructure wasn't necessarily the first target for intellectual property theft. When you get to ransomware and other sorts of like money-focused criminal activity, critical infrastructure is an amazing target because it can't afford to be down. So any downtime costs the organization money. So it's a target for criminals. They want to make money. They're going to be motivated by money. And that's what's going to prioritize their efforts. So there's no sector that's really safe in that space. Any sector that can actually be compelled to pay up a ransom is really what will be targeted. And criminals are amazingly adaptable to exactly what makes money and what doesn't. Also, I'll just tie this into the state-sponsored threat as well. In our previous assessments, we'd always said that state-sponsored threat actors were looking at critical infrastructure in Canada, doing reconnaissance against them. We knew this, and potentially pre-positioning, but we always said there was no risk of disruption in the absence of actual direct hostilities. That was a key judgment that we had always made. Over the past 2 years, and the past year in particular, we've changed that judgment and saying that, there could be disruption happening, and we have seen an example where state-aligned groups actually tried to disrupt critical infrastructure in Canada, right, through exposed OT infrastructure. So we have the evidence to prove it as well. So this is really a change in judgment. You would have also seen more recently some of the Volt Typhoon publications that had come out of Microsoft and the United States government as well. We had put out papers as well in conjunction with our allies on this. And this was really PRC prepositioning on critical infrastructure in the US. So once again, changing our judgments as to what to really look for. We talked about risk earlier before this presentation started, but cybersecurity is really about risk management, understanding what those risks are. And this is where the risk space is going, is to actually, disruption of critical infrastructure. A point that we had, a couple of years ago, and it's certainly just grown, threat actors are trying to divide and disrupt us. A big part of this was, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. All of those are just growing more and more, I guess, impactful in our lives on a daily basis. You're seeing that with elections. It's kind of the year of elections this year. Canada might be, this year or next year, a big US election coming up as well. But certainly we've seen, the trust in democratic institutions being eroded and being intentionally eroded in many ways, right, with this misinformation. That's why it's super important for everyone to be good consumers of information, understanding that what you're reading needs to be curated and needs to be judged, by each person. And it's a muscle we're all going to have to develop in democratic society. And, fueling, I guess, misinformation is we tied that to what the next point is in terms of disruptive technologies. So part of this was really, driving misinformation through algorithms, understanding social media algorithms, but also social botnets, right? So you can have botnets that actually drive false information from a very small number of, seeds of information. This is what you're actually consuming on a daily basis. So not hard to do, and unfortunately very impactful in terms of driving false messaging into society. In terms of disruptive technologies, the two that we had highlighted in 2022, AI, particularly LLMs, and quantum technologies as they're coming, certainly had a big impact, and we will continue to talk about them in the upcoming slides. So just a little bit about the Cyber Center. We are the national CERT, right? So we're CERT CA, we're the registered CERT for Canada. We, as I said, take in over 1,200 incidents last year from critical infrastructure, in addition to another 1,000 plus from federal government. Work very closely with our provincial partners that are here as well. Very important for us, work with municipal governments as well, and then critical infrastructure partners right across Canada as well. Some through bigger associations like telcos we've had a long-standing association with in the CSTAC, the Cybersecurity Technical Advisory Committee. So that's basically telcos getting together and working together to solve cybersecurity problems. Do the same thing with the banks, and more recently are doing the same thing with the energy sector here, built out of Calgary really, and the Canadian Gas Association and Enbridge were the two that actually kicked it off. But really good representation in that group. So pretty amazing to see these communities coming together to be able to work. Can you hear me now? Right on. Thank you. And sorry. Awesome. Yeah. So, really important for us to work closely with these different groups. And very good. A couple of the other things I'll talk about is we have, for clients, we have, several thousand registered with us. So as you become a partner of the Cyber Center, we send out like alerting systems, right? So we get feeds and feeds of threat intelligence. We kind of vet that, but we will actually send alerts out to your organization, not just basically on threats that we see to your organization, but also things like exposed vulnerabilities. So the next vulnerability comes out, we'll do a scan of Canada and actually notify people of these things in advance. Very important. And then if we understand if you're compromised right after that, we'll notify you of that as well. So something that we do on a regular basis. And then on a monthly basis, we'll wrap these things up and put them as kind of summarized scorecards that give you an idea as to what we've seen for the month. I'll talk a bit more in detail of some of the other services that we've done. But basically what we built is based off some of the things we do in the Government of Canada. Very high level set of services that we have. I mean, you can reach out to us anytime. cyber.gc.ca is our portal. So please don't hesitate. If you report an incident to us from your organizations, we're not compelled to release that information to anyone. So it's confidential. We keep the information trusted. Our job is really just to help you, and that's why we're there, right? So please don't hesitate to reach out. We've seen many, many incidents, and we can certainly offer advice and guidance to help. And then we can go the next level to things like even like log analysis or even pushing out an incident handler to your site. And the far extreme of that is actually deploying our own tools that we use on government, but we try to not do that. And we need different authorizations for that, plus a request from the organization. And it has to be pretty much impactful to the Government of Canada. There's a whole process to Canada as a whole. There's a whole process for that, but that's as far as we've gone, and we have done that. Certainly engaging critical infrastructure. I've talked about that. cryptographic equipment assurance is really important. I'll talk a bit about that when we get to quantum as well, but just for interest, we do run the cryptographic module validation program. So if you ever look at FIPS approvals on products for crypt, we run that with the US. So it's NIST and ourselves that actually run that program and certify all the labs that do that testing. So it's a piece of what we do in that space. Standards and certification are pretty important in terms of raising the bar. Defending government networks, that's what we do. That's where you kind of learn a lot of what we do. We have almost 1 million sensors now on government products. So if you call that maybe EDR, we built that before EDR was around. So that was really it, but it's more of an XDR ecosystem that I'll talk a bit about. And then, of course, information sharing. And this is where I'd love to have feedback as well. We put out a lot of different products and hopefully get that into your hands in a timely way. But really interested in terms of how we can actually create more value for all of you for the information that we do have. So a little bit about sensors, then I'll talk a bit about an incident. I didn't put a slide in there, but I thought I'll talk about the most impactful incident that we had this year on government. But really how we defend the government, this used to not be shared publicly, but we have more recently put this into our public documentation. This started in 2009, 2010. We started doing network-based sensors, really monitoring traffic in and out of the government of Canada as a big ecosystem. We started building what we called host-based sensors back in 2011, 2012. Now it's called EDR. That's what it is. We realized that putting the network data together with the host-based data was pretty much essential for finding any advanced threats. Just so you know, when we turned on our network sensors in 2010 for Shared Services Canada, which is the big network, it took us about 2 weeks to figure out that the government of Canada was owned by a state-sponsored threat actor at that time. So really good return on investment almost immediately, and that's why we've invested in the program. And pretty much all of the nation-state compromises that we found on the government of Canada has been through this ecosystem. Cloud, 2018, we went to cloud-based sensors. Obviously, 77 institutions. So that's really hundreds of tenancies. We monitor all of that. It all comes back to one big data lake, and we run lots of analytics against that. It's really what we think is necessary in the new era of looking at threats, is really bringing all that data together into one spot and then running comprehensive analytics against it. And as you get to more like compute power and GPUs and LLMs, that's really the model that you're going to need to find threats. And then, we've looked at, how to shift, network sensors into the cloud. And we have other sensors that I haven't listed here, but that's really the ecosystem that we built. Also of interest, and I think will be interesting to future talks, is we used to build our own analytic tools, but now there's so many amazing open source platforms that are out there that we have pretty much an open source analytic platform. So I think maybe as a future talk, we'll have someone do a deep dive on that, because we'd like to share the tools that we build when we can. And that would be one of them as well. So I'll get into that a bit more. So maybe just on this slide, I won't talk too much about this, but I will talk about one incident that we had that I probably think you'd all be interested in. I think it was called Arcane Door by Cisco in April, but this was an incident that we had in January. I don't talk about any specific department. If you report incidents to us, we won't talk about you either. This is really what we do, but we try to share the information that's related to them. And in this case here, you've heard about edge devices being exploited all this year. It's kind of the year of exploitation of edge devices. These are the devices that are supposed to keep you safe. But for some reason, we've seen almost every major vendor of edge devices compromised. So, this is a worry, and it should be a worry for all of us. And that, that technology is supposed to be that security gateway into your organization is actually the entry point for threat actors. So in this case here, Cisco wrote a blog on this, so I'm happy to mention it. But we had found this ourselves in January. Really, exploitation of the edge device, 0 days used to actually get 2 different implants onto the actual router, so running in your router. Almost impossible to find. Modified the logs so that you wouldn't even see any of their activity in the logs, so they had full control over the logging system. Able to selectively choose traffic to be routed back to another host. So basically right from the edge of your network, selecting traffic and sending it to wherever it was wanted. And also anti-forensic techniques baked right into the router itself, right? So this is all showing very detailed and I guess in-depth understanding of how to actually do this to an edge device, with also some amazing capabilities for actually grabbing information. So we were lucky that we found it, to be quite honest, but the sensor network allows us to be able to find these sorts of things, whereas I think most organizations would never be able to see this. So flagging it as a risk, right on the edge, a lot of data transits those things. I mean, this is where all your users kind of connect through in terms of your remote access. So I would raise this as something really important and kind of a worrisome trend that we've seen in terms of the different compromises of or the different vulnerabilities that we've seen in edge devices over the past year. If you wanted to read more about it, Cisco TELUS did write a really good blog on it. They did credit the Cyber Center as well as Microsoft and some other partners in terms of getting all the information together and looking at the infrastructure from around the world. But these are the types of collaborations that we need. And I think the one thing I'd like to flag from that example is collective defense, right? So this is something that we found. We were able to start pulling the thread. We talked to a technology vendor. They were able to pull the thread. They talked to another technology vendor. They pulled the thread to figure out what was going on in the world. They gave some information back to us. We put that together. They wrote a good blog that informs the public. They improved their software. So kind of dedication all around, a lot of hard work to find a really advanced threat. But in the end, even the infrastructure was shared for people to block. We wrote a cyber flash on it in January, shared it with our partners. So that's kind of the way it works in terms of trying to get the information from whatever we find into the hands of not just our direct partners, but also tech companies around the world to make sure that we're upping the level of the products that are out there. So one thing anyone here heard of assembly line? Good. So some people have heard of it. So this is basically something we had started writing in an innovation workshop that we run at the Cyber Center called Big Dig. And this came out of Big Dig 1 and we're at Big Dig 14. So I'd say it was about 14 years ago that we actually wrote this for the first time. We had the problem on the government of Canada of how do we analyze files at scale? We had some really smart malware reverse engineers, but as you know, they're few and far between and you can't really scale them that well. So how do we actually get all the smart things they do on a daily basis into an automated framework to be able to process millions and millions of files? And we do process almost 10 million files a day through this platform. So this is something that we built up and then decided to open source, which was a big step for the Cyber Center and CSC. We hadn't open sourced anything. We did this about 4 or 5 years ago, and uptake has been amazing, right? From around the world. We have amazing partners that are actually dedicating, giving us really good contributions. Runs in GCP, AWS, and Azure as well. So I would say that, if you're going to build something that processes files, don't do that. Grab the open source and build off of it as a community. We can all build different plugins and extend the capabilities of this sort of product. Basically delineates everything according to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So lots of things built in already, and I have a couple of slides that I'll just go into a bit more. But really the point today was, sharing these things are important, democratize the things that we have, and that by working together, we can actually, give ourselves a leg up in terms of what we need to be able to do. In terms of the other things that this does do, I'll just skip ahead to maybe this slide. Dynamic analysis as well, so a lot of open source components. But the other thing is sharing of IOCs, which we do. We have a threat intelligence feed that shares a lot of those actionable IOCs, and tens of thousands of them a year. But IOCs are ephemeral, and in that case, if you look at DNS or IP addresses and these sorts of things, getting into things like Yara rules are really important as well, right? Those consistent signatures that allow you to actually find threats, or Suricata that we have in there as well. Very important to us. So we're trying to plug, how do we get past, your basic first level IOCs and into the things that really catch the TTPs that the threat actors are using. And the last one I'll mention there is Sigma, right? So we try to compile everything into Sigma. Sigma is a way of describing a behavior that, or a TTP basically, or a threat technique that a threat actor uses. That can actually be absorbed into multiple different platforms. So it's kind of a platform agnostic way of describing a behavior. So if we all did that, we'd be able to share our collective knowledge a lot better. So these are the things we're trying to plug. And this is what we use in assembly line as well. And maybe the other thing I'll plug just on this as well is that Yara, we were sharing, and this is really great, we're sharing Yara rules, which is a way of finding malicious files on your operating systems, or through file analysis. But what we found is that not all Yara rules are being written the same way. So we're going to have to we're having to reformat all people's really good Yara rules before we could even use them. So we created a standard. So we do have a standard on Yara that's in our GitHub as well. So the more people that use that, the easier it is to share. So another thing I will plug in that space. And then the last thing is that, there's dynamic analysis in there as well. So as you get your first level, like say it's an email attachment or a piece of malware, it'll go out to the internet, pull down the second stage, and the next stage is analyze those. A bunch of unpackers, these sorts of deobfuscation modules built in as well. So no shortage of capability, but it's an opportunity for us to all use the same platforms and then keep building so they get better. So the other thing that we did with assembly line is that not everyone has the capability to go and install it in your own cloud environment, which we understood. But if you become a partner of the Cyber Center, we actually host an instance as well. So this helps us, but it also helps you. So even from my cell phone right now, I could take a sample file, push it off into malware.cyber.gc.ca. It'll analyze it. It'll break it down, give me the full results. It runs it through a bunch of different antivirus, a bunch of different Yara rules, a bunch of different modules. It'll unpack it, do a lot of analysis, and give you all those results. So if you're a partner of ours, you can actually just log into this portal, scan your files, gives you instant feedback. But we also get a sample of that file as well. So that's important for us. And it's also shared amongst the community. So if you're finding something malicious, then you have a good opportunity to actually, help the whole ecosystem by sharing that information. So there's just an example of who we shared it with so far. Cities, provinces, territories, and CI partners are using this actively, as well as the federal government in terms of sharing those files. And the numbers are growing, as I mentioned as well. And in terms of just assembly line, some pretty big players around the world that have adopted this platform. So some good tech development in that space. The last tool that I will talk about here that we've shared is one that is more of a problem for us, but will become a problem for many of you as well with different sources of information. So people always looked at, I think the first thing I will say is that if you look at threat actor techniques like living off the land or the compromise of edge devices or the usage of anonymization networks, which is really what we're up against nowadays, those are much harder to find through your typical alert-based SIMs and other sorts of systems that you might have in your networks. So really you need multiple different sources of information and telemetry, bring that all together. Hopefully you have centralized logging, that's step one, but knowing what to actually log is really important as well to find any of these techniques. So we're putting a guide out saying, hey, here's your guide to centralized logging. These are the logs that you should have as a minimum in all of your environments to be able to find the threats. And then if you're actually collecting logs from a bunch of different sources, we found that we don't necessarily need some of the technologies that are out there. So we built an open source platform called Howler that'll actually aggregate all your alerts, brings them in really closely. You can actually, tag them and label them in really useful ways. And really what we're building here is the foundation for being able to, yes, it's a centralized repo of alerts, but with all the necessary labels so that you could easily apply an LLM in the next couple of years and really start to cluster these things so that, hey, these 17 alerts that came from very disparate sources are actually all related to the same incident, and you're going to have your models actually being able to cluster these for you. So once again, open sourced, really been pushing this for about a week now and had some really good industry traction already in terms of folk that are like MSSPs that have to aggregate logs from different areas. They're saying, hey, this is a great solution for us. So we'll see how it goes. I think I will skip this one. But once again, these are maybe things we can bring back to BSides and have the actual developers come and talk to you guys about it to hear the feedback that you would have. So something that is probably really important to all of you right now, there's a lot of talk on AI. We've been doing ML for decades, really, in the Cyber Center and at CSE. I think we put our first no human in the loop ML algorithm that blocked malicious DNS back in 2018. So we've been doing this for a bit of time. But right now, LLMs have really made a big difference. We've kind of incorporated on our cyber defense data and integrated into an LLM environment only since December of last year. And just in that, I guess, 9 months now, we've seen ridiculous progress in terms of what is capable. So I'm going to share 3 examples of what we've been able to do. Interested in hearing other examples of what people are doing with LLMs in the space, because I didn't talk directly about AI, but certainly, threat actors will be using it. But that's why it's so important that, cyber defenders are actually taking full advantage of what's out there with the amazing capabilities that are there. So the first one, we looked at tools like, like a assembly line, which was, our malware analysis. Well, there's only so many reverse engineers that can actually go and analyze malware. And the results themselves are often fairly, obtuse as well in terms of understanding exactly what all the different tools churn out for you. So what we have now is an assistant for assembly line that'll actually summarize in English or French, basically your understanding of, what the malware actually did. This malware will create a mutex, it puts these files on disk, it'll connect to this infrastructure. It just summarizes it fairly quickly, but at the same point in time, you can then ask it questions. So you don't have to actually dig into assembly language and actually figure out what it's doing. You can actually just say, oh, does it do this? Does it do that? So it's a very different interface for the analyst, and it brings analysts up to a certain level right off the bat. We all talk about skills and, bridging the gap to what people can do in terms of analysis. This is where we see LLMs actually playing a big role in terms of, how do we get all your analysts up to a certain level where they can really interrogate the data that you have. Another one that we have is basically our analytic platform that we've been running. Is anyone familiar with like Jupyter Notebooks and Python or Jupyter Notebooks? Yeah, so it's a very powerful tool for being able to analyze data, more of a data scientist type of interface, but something that we actually have standardized on de facto for our environment. But in terms of having to query that, it's once again quite a barrier of entry for many of your analysts. So how do you actually get that down and accessible to everyone that's there? Well, we applied AI, and that way you don't have to write Python to actually query your data anymore. You can actually just ask questions in natural language. So getting there, but the results once again are pretty amazing in terms of just being able to, ask a question, and then the SQL queries or the Python queries in the back are all obfuscated. You don't have to deal with them as an analyst. So it gets everyone to a certain level. And the last one seems kind of obvious, but it's really interesting from us. I mean, I kind of opened by talking about all the advice and guidance that we have on the website. I actually use Google to find stuff on our own website just to figure out where the documents are. But really, what we did is we said, well, how do you actually just understand and synthesize all of the advice and guidance we have so you can just ask it simple questions? So we baked all of our advice and guidance into our model, and we created like Cyber GPT is what we called it in this case, but it was just for fun. But really, you can just ask questions now of all your advice and guidance and say, hey, how would I actually implement zero trust in this type of environment? And it'll actually explain stuff back to you from the advice and guidance that we have. Or you can actually say, explain multi-factor authentication to a 5-year-old child. And it'll actually change what that output is to the right wording of how you'd actually want to explain it. So real opportunities here. Like I said, it's just really a matter of 7 or 8 months, but some really amazing steps forward in terms of what we're able to do in this space. And there's a bunch of challenges, but maybe just 2 of the ones that I would say are really important is how quickly things are changing. Like what's changed even since December is crazy in terms of what's available out there. You can't even keep up with all the developments and all the releases. So you almost need a whole team of people understanding that this is what's coming out, and then you have to take advantage of it. So something to keep in mind as you actually go down this journey. And then challenges in testing as well. If you test software, you usually know if something works or something doesn't. With AI, you get an answer. You just don't know the veracity of that answer and whether you can trust it or not. So it's a very different way of how do you make sure that this is open for public consumption at this point or not. You have to change your test methodology. Shifting to a disruptive technology, quantum technology, so becoming more and more real, right? I think that you have the first set of quantum computers that are out there, but what is really the threat and what are we worried about? So in Crypt, we'll talk about what's a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And for that, we'll say that's a computer that's actually sufficiently powerful to break the current cryptographic algorithms that we have in play today. Crypt is based on hard math problems. So you create some math problem and say, well, this problem is so hard that it's going to take 50 years for many computers to try to break. So who cares if people break it in 50 years, right? So that was kind of the math that went into the cryptographic algorithms, particularly for key exchange. That's really what's worried here. Quantum computers can run very different sorts of algorithms. For example, a Shor's algorithm that can actually break those types of hard math problems very quickly. So things like key exchange algorithms, which are super important, can now be broken very quickly. But should you have a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, which raises the risk of really collect now and break later. So if you're to store a bunch of data that's encrypted right now and you're able to get a quantum computer 5-10 years from now, you'd be able to open it up because you'd have sufficiently powerful computers. So that's really the risk that you're looking at. So if you're looking at your own organizations, you would say, well, what data do I really care if someone was to open up once they got a quantum computer? And that's the data that you should probably be most interested in at this point. What you'd want to do as an organization now is new algorithms are out. So NIST's approved those. We've worked with NIST in other countries in terms of actually vetting the math behind these algorithms. But really what they have to do now is make it into the supply chain. So first of all, you get the approval of the algorithms, then you get the standardization of the products. So those VPN concentrators and the other types of products, every product that basically uses encryption will have to churn its algorithms. So the challenge for all of you is really, what encryption is being used on my networks? Which ones might be vulnerable to quantum, so the asymmetric key exchange algorithms? And then how should I prioritize my turnover of equipment over the next few years as quantum resistant algorithms actually get baked into products? They're not there yet. They have to go through a standardization process, but in the next couple of years, you're going to see, new appliances and new software packages that are quantum resistant, and you're going to have to, life cycle the equipment that you have to make sure that you're actually quantum resistant moving forward. So it's really a plan now sort of effort. And the way to do it is to understand the cryptographic inventory on your networks. People struggle just having an asset inventory of their networks. So, going that next level to understanding what's your cryptographic inventory is really where we need to get to, so you can understand what's really at risk and what's not. But really plan now and figure out how to build that cryptographic inventory. And there's tools coming out that are able to help with that as well. So I think I talked a bit about that process. In terms of how to transition across quantum to product validation. We play a role in that in the crypto module validation program. And the last thing I'll say about that is, yes, it's important to have the right algorithms, but implementations can be vulnerable as well. That's why it's so important to wait for the standardization of the cryptographic actual modules in the products and looking for that brand. So just shifting into like, what the Cyber Center does in a year. This is probably something that none of you maybe understand or know, and I'd love to share that. So defending the government, we have those almost million sensors that are there that we defend on a daily basis. We also have autonomous defense. So as we find things that are actually malicious, we have algorithms to run, we block it. We block pretty aggressively, up to 6.6 billion things on a regular basis blocked on the government of Canada on a daily basis. And then different layers of other blocks that happen. So really important to actually just block the threats, whether it's anywhere in the kill chain is really what we target with different analytics that are running. One thing that I'd like to plug as well as a nation, has anyone heard of Canadian Shield? So we got a few. So this is protective DNS for Canada for free, right? So we had partnered with CIRA at that time, the Canadian Internet Registry Association. And they said, they had a DNS firewall, but they said, because we're not for profit, we're willing to, give this out to Canadians for free just to help, this is a philanthropic effort. So we said, hey, we're happy to share our threat intelligence feed with you for free as well, if it'll benefit all Canadians. So I just wanted to plug this. I have it on my phone. Cyber Center is the one-way, set of information. They get threat intelligence feeds from Akamai as well, not just the Cyber Center. But if you put that on your phone, you have 3 options. You can put it on your home router as well. The first option is really just sovereign DNS. So your DNS isn't leaving the country. So pretty important, at least you know that you have some privacy there in terms of who's looking at your web traffic. The second one is security. So that's where those threat feeds actually come in and it'll block anything in those threat feeds. So right away, you actually have that first layer of protection and it's free. So free for your household. I put it on my home router as well. We're the only country that I know that actually has free protective DNS for the country if you want it. So it would be pretty good thing to have. And the third one is kind of a family friendly setting as well, which kind of filters inappropriate content. It has nothing to do with the Cyber Center. That's CIRA's solution in that space, but those are the options that you have. And I would recommend it just in terms of personal protection and household protection as well. The numbers there, almost 300,000 users with 500 million blocks in the last year in terms of things that it's blocked. So making some progress, but would love to see that in the millions. Getting to ransomware, one of the things that we've done is we get calls from organizations that have been ransomware, gigantic organizations, smaller organizations. It's incredibly distressing to see the situations that these organizations are in when they've lost communications or they've lost their data, they're not sure what to do. This is a big problem, and if you haven't lived it, then it's certainly something you don't want to live, to be quite honest. And we've lived it many times over with many different organizations in Canada. So what we tried to do in this space as well is great to help people recover, but that's really not the space we want to be in. We want to be in the prevention. So we put out a ransomware playbook and lots of advice and guidance, but that really relies on everyone doing, the right things and the basics, which is super important. But what we've also started doing is using analytics to figure out, what do we know about the ransomware actors that are out there? And what is that? How do we know when they got the first stage of malware into a network? Because it's a series of stages to actually get to the point where they can actually encrypt your data and extort the organization. So we've been able to get into that stage 1 and understand the early stages of ransomware, not just in Canada, but to other partners as well. And since for last year, we had over 250 pre-ransomware notifications to organizations where we knew the first stage of ransomware was in the organization. We knew what computer it was on. We were able to tell them. They were able to get back to us and say, yeah, we've removed the computer. It doesn't always happen that they get back to us, but we try our best. But this is really important to us, right? So we can actually just, prevent even one ransomware. It's a big deal when you look at the price tag for an organization. But getting to 250 for a year was a really big outcome for us. And what I didn't say here, there's another set of hundreds that we've sent to other countries as well. I think 250 to the US as well in terms of organizations that would also have impact on Canada as well. So pretty important work that we're doing. And hopefully that continues, but certainly investing more in terms of shifting left and getting the pre-ransomware notifications out there. Sharing with our partners is something that I want to talk about as well. Really, when you get into things like securing AI or just sharing threat information, what you will see from us as well is a lot of joint publications. So really important for us to put out common and consistent advice and guidance so you're not getting 7 different documents from 7 different countries. why spam everyone with all this information? So you'll see a lot of co-sealed documentations, like Volt Typhoon was one. Securing AI was another. We just try to get consistent advice and guidance or consistent threat information out, and you'll see like one document written by one Five Eyes partner, or even broader than that with other countries included, but a bunch of different seals from all the different countries that are there that have all endorsed the product and have maybe contributed some kind of evidence to that product as well. So something to look out for, and we've done that 14 times in the past year. I mentioned earlier, 2,200 almost incidents is what we deal with in a year. So it's that seems to be the number. Almost 2,000 CI partners that we work with. So a lot of traffic, a lot of friends in Canada and growing. So super important to us. But then like what happens if you've actually engaged with us? Well, then almost on a weekly basis, we're sending out cyber flashes, things that we're seeing that partners are shared with us. We anonymize the information in there, but we say, hey, this is what happened in Canada or to some of our partners, and we try to get that into your hands, typically at a TLP Amber or some type of restricted set of information, depending on how we got the information. If it's public, then we'll share it publicly to make sure the broadest audience actually gets the information. And then we have no shortage of threat assessments and guidance publications as well, which are very important. Talk a little bit of innovation. I don't know how we're doing on time, so I'll be interested in knowing that because I'd love to hear some. Was it 30 minutes? Okay, good. So then I'll make sure I leave at least 15, 20 minutes for questions. Innovation is really important. This event is really important in terms of getting people together and talking about innovation. Big Dig is one that we started on the classified side. As I mentioned, we're on Big Dig 14. So 14 years ago, we started doing this in terms of cyber defense, bringing in Five Eyes partners. At that time, there wasn't a huge community of cyber defenders 14 years ago. So we had to bring in the experts that we could find, work together on really difficult problems. And then the outcomes that we had from those types of workshops were amazing. Getting people dedicated to just doing, innovation, analytic effort on real data over 2 weeks. The productivity is still, out surpassing anything else that we have from deliberate other planning efforts as well. Geek Week is the one that I really wanted to plug for all of you. It kind of started a bit later than Big Dig, but we realized, hey, collaborating with other governments was really fantastic, but collaborating with industry was really, really important as well. So we started Geek Week in 2014 and have, been running it every year since, which is amazing. It's grown. We cap it at about 300 participants because that's all we can really host in the Cyber Center, but the demand is far beyond that. And once again, it's an innovation hands-on workshop where we pick really key themes. They're not all proposed by us. People write abstracts in that. We have the big cloud service providers. We have a lot of the security service providers. We have telcos from around the world, banks from around the world, and really mix up the teams. People get to work together. And the outcome here is that everything that's actually produced in this event is shared with the community. So we're trying to democratize everyone's knowledge and make sure we're bringing everyone up to a certain level. And we've certainly benefited from all the skill and talent that come to these events as well. And you get a fancy T-shirt like the one I'm wearing. This is from the last Geek Week as well. In terms of some of the outcomes of Geek Week, created our national victim notification system that I mentioned earlier. This is basically taking in threat feeds and sending out notifications to Canadian organizations. We had like DMARC tracking, which is really important. I think many organizations have implemented, but if you want to stop phishing, DMARC's probably step one in terms of protecting your brand. Then we had honeypots, right? Deception technology. So this is one where we could actually emulate vulnerabilities, but it was in a package. So, hey, if you want to emulate certain vulnerabilities, super important for us to understand who's exploiting what vulnerability. A vulnerability that's released is really important, but once you know someone's exploiting it, we act very differently as a cyber center in terms of notifying people because there's real damage to be done at that point. If you can emulate it and understand what's going on in the world, really important. So this is one that we built, and it's been taken on by some pretty huge companies in the world in terms of using it. So lots of uptake in the products, but these are the things that we're inviting people to across Canada to help, build the collective effort. And, crowdsourcing is an amazing way of getting all the good ideas together. Maybe I'll leave it there, but certainly some other elements in terms of just the Internet of Things, getting into, intelligence, like self-driving vehicles and some of these other things as well. We have really good partners that bring cool new technologies that we wouldn't normally have access to. And you get to kick the tires on them and understand what the upcoming vulnerabilities are of some of these, cutting edge connected technologies. Very important for us to understand that. And then key to the Cyber Center as well as partnerships. Our longstanding partnership is with the security and intelligence community and the Five Eyes. That dates back to World War II. Very close, and you certainly feel that in working. I came from the private sector, telecom, moving into the S&I community, it was amazing to see that kind of collaboration. It really surprised me. So that's step one. Lots of benefits to Canada in that relationship, but Canada certainly provides a lot of really good information to that group as well, and a lot of good technology. When you get across sectors, Canada's got a pretty good ecosystem coming together. We have like ESTAC for energy. We have some representatives in the audience from ESTAC here today, so really nice to see you here as well. That's just a year old, but this is an opportunity for experts from the same community to come together and share all the common threats that they're seeing, so everyone's kind of at the same level. It also gives us the opportunity, if we see a certain threat, to reach out to one organization, share it all at once, so everyone's at the same level and we're not missing anyone. CSTAC is the same thing for telecom. It's been around for a long time, and we've certainly worked closely with CSTAC. SIFTR is digital resilience. So that's kind of a new forum that brings in a lot of different tech companies. If you are not playing in that space, CFRG is the financial resiliency group. So I'm not sure if people know that these exist in Canada, but it's broader than banks. It's our financial resiliency. And then we have, Martin here, but basically the NSIP, getting all the provinces together, super important, great community, right? And certainly the provinces have been coming together, and great leadership shown by amazing folks that have really, shown a lot of initiative in terms of getting that community together and building a really collaborative environment. So big progress made in the last couple of years there, certainly. And then CSIRTs, just out of interest, part of the IWWN, International Watch and Warning Network, 16 to 18 countries, so sharing information with us on a daily basis. PAXON, Indo-Pacific, we just joined that a couple of weeks ago. They had a big conference, so that's getting another idea as to what threats are happening in a different part of the world. CSIRT Americas, North and South America, part of that, so all those countries are part of one group where they share information on a daily basis. And then, of course, we're going to be looking to see how we can actually build kind of another cyber defense collective. You might have heard of the JCDC in the United States, the Joint Cyber Defense Collective. We've created the CCDC in Canada now. We also work very closely with the JCDC in the US to make sure we're aligned with CISA in the US and in terms of information sharing. So we'll be building that out in terms of, how do we actually make sure that we have, mobilized the entire security and intelligence kind of providers, or the security service providers in Canada, and are on the same page. So if you have something to share, we can get it to the hands of those providers in a very easy way. And of course, that would bring in, a lot of the big tech providers as well that can have a really big influence on Canada in terms of, being able to address threats. So I talked about some of these already. I talked about Canadian Shield. The last one I will talk about in this was really phishing, just other collaborative projects we can do. 7726, if anyone's heard of that, SMS. So really, if you get a smishing email, you can forward that on to 7726. It'll go to the telcos. The telcos will strip any privacy-related information out, and then share that with the Cyber Center. We run them all through a big analytic environment, determine maliciousness, strip out the malicious URLs. If they're impacting government, we can take them off the internet, so they're not impacting anyone. We also did that for health during COVID as well, because we didn't want people benefiting from health-related scams during the COVID pandemic. So we actually just took them down and off the internet. We had the permission to do so, but otherwise government has taken off. Otherwise, we just take those malicious URLs, feed them back into our threat feed, and share it back to all of our partners as well. So 7726 for smishing, send it off. The telcos are the first line of defense, and then they share it with us for collaborative takedowns and mitigation after that. And then I will maybe just end with all this cybersecurity advice and guidance. So if you're looking for something, we work very closely with, we align ourselves closely with the NIST guidance in the United States. We put out advice and guidance on pretty much any kind of upcoming, basically effort that you would need to secure your systems. So lots of information there. Don't hesitate, cyber.gc.ca. One thing that we're doing, if you're a critical infrastructure provider, C26, is still going through the Senate, so we'll see what happens in terms of regulation in cyber for critical infrastructure. But what we have done is made sure, and we've listened to industry, and industry said, I have so many regulators to talk to, so many different types of standards to meet. Can you please harmonize? So we've worked with CISA in the United States. They have their cyber performance goals. We created our cyber resiliency goals as well that we'll be putting out. I don't want to, get too far ahead of it, but coming out in about a month and a half. And that's really just harmonizing some of these goals for critical infrastructure with our US counterparts, knowing that critical infrastructure in North America really does run north-south, and we want to have consistent guidelines and guidance right across that border. So look for those to be coming out. I think they're a really good first step in terms of firming up our critical infrastructure. And please visit the website. And then if you're really just looking for advice and guidance on a personal level, family members, these sorts of things, we have our public awareness campaign called Get Cyber Safe with lots of good tools, toolkits, things you can use in your organization so you don't have to recreate them yourselves. How to look out for phishing, how to secure social media, how to secure your devices, accounts, things that you'll want to use around your house. They're already there, so please reuse them and happy to hear feedback on all of those. But the real message here is, reach out to us. We're here to help. We're building partnerships. We know that it's a collective effort right across Canada to make sure that we're actually upping our cybersecurity. Lots of different ways to get in touch there. Our GitHub is there as well if you're looking for any of that software that I've talked about. And from there, we have different ways of reaching out to the actual software developers to guide you through installs or to answer any of those technical questions that you'll need to understand if you actually look to deploy any of these things. So I'm happy to share this information as well. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much. Really happy to see such a big group here and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajiv. Quick questions from well, it might not be a quick question. We'll see. National threat blocking. So this is something that we brought up at the national level. Each of our organization at this point in time, whenever we face a threat, whether it's denial of service attack or a particular threat actor trying to penetrate our systems, we usually block the IP within our organization. So the threat actor can't reach us anymore, but they'll usually move on to the next target, which very often happens to be another of the companies that are in this room. We had a conversation nationally about potentially doing what Australia is doing. So definitely a rigorous set of criteria to block an IP address or a threat actor. Definitely a good governance process would have to be put in place, no doubts there. But is this something that the federal government would be considering at this point in time, the potential for national threat blocking?
Yeah, so really good question. I mean, why does everyone have to block the same IP when you can take care of it in one spot? The closest thing that I've seen the federal government doing is really the CRTC botnet kind of consultation. So they've put that out for consultation, and that was the ability for the CRTC to basically test the telcos to block exactly this. So we'd be blocking on the telco perimeter with a rigorous set of criteria. We have been involved in that consultation process, and I think that it's still in the works, so it hasn't gotten to the point where it's manifested in any kind of real program yet. But that is underway and in consultation with the CRTC. ISED is the telco regulator for information in Canada, probably being a good home to make that decision, right? CSC would certainly have technologies that could contribute to that, and there's many different ways of blocking, I would say as well. So it's a really important discussion for us to have as we get into this, a much more kind of hostile and contested world. How do we protect ourselves as a nation? And really, it's collective defense. And there's many organizations that are involved in doing that, whether it's a cloud service provider or a telco. There's BGP sinkholing as another way of doing it, right? There's different sorts of techniques. But the only organization that I've seen that would have the power to maybe do that is the CRTC as part of ISED. And they have that first consultation out. So we'll see how that goes, see if it lands with an approval. And then I know that we were asked in that consultation, what could you provide in terms of threat feeds and who would be that curator of what to block, right? That's one of the big questions there as well. Like you said, it needs a rigorous regime. We don't want to censor information in Canada. We want to make sure it's free and open, but we don't want to expose Canadians to this block. Why does everyone have to do it themselves? So we'll see where it lands, but I think it's still a growing area, but a good question. So thank you. I can hear you.
No, I think we're recording as well. Okay.
There we go. Hi. So there's really seems to be no shortage of either open source or paid intelligence feeds for anyone to ingest who is interested in it. But the difficult part has been operationalizing that data. What would you recommend for something like that?
Yeah, so operationalizing threat intelligence is a big deal, right? And it's complex and not necessarily straightforward. We take in over 100 threat intelligence feeds. That's not even including, classified intel and these sorts of things. So it's not for the faint of heart. I would say that, and they're not all created equal either, right? You can't just take a feed in and start blocking it. There could be a lot of false positives and you don't really know how to vet it. I would start small with some of these feeds, right? Test them out, but you do need some kind of vetting. We did something a little fancier on our side. Like we used like an analytic to figure out, what would happen to if we were to block something going back 2 weeks of data to try to predict the business impact, right? So before we actually block it, so we have an automated vetting. So we kind of run it past the historical data, and then we say, hey, this is good to block, or it's like, no, this is going to be a false positive, and it gets kicked right out. Not everyone can just run an automated type of process like that, unfortunately, but you do need a CTI team, right? You need someone that actually curates this, that actually vets the veracity of the actual indicators. This feed is quite trustworthy. This is how we can use them. But it's work as well. So that's what it is. We scaled through automation. That's what we had to do. But we also block for 100 departments. So we have the ability to build the automation. But that's really it. It takes work.
What advice would you give to students who are aspiring to work for the CSE?
So really good question. We are recruiting, as are most cybersecurity firms out there. So it's amazing to see students here. We have a couple of different career guides on our website. Where we hire a ton of people is our co-op program. Co-op programs have been kind of our lifeblood in terms of getting people into the organization. We have a really low attrition rate. So our attrition rate is, I think, somewhere around 4%, with over 2% being retirement. So when people come in, they tend to stay forever almost. I've been here 18 years, and I spent a decade in the private sector beforehand. But definitely getting in at the co-op level, but certainly apply. We're looking for all kinds of skills in terms of cybersecurity. It's not just a computer scientist anymore. There's a big range of folks that we're hiring. We have an amazing EDI effort as well. That's becoming quite a diverse organization. So really that whole breadth, but certainly our website is the recruiting tool. And our co-op program has really paid dividends for us. So if you have a co-op term, apply to CSE. But otherwise, the website and reach out to us, and we're always happy to hear from you.
Hi, Rajiv. Myself, Prashant from Enbridge, and thank you for such a great presentation. I know CGA has some conversations with CCS on that topic. Just curious on the, you talked about defensive collective, JCDC is one mechanism like that. On the offensive capabilities, I mean, I don't know how much you can share on that, but the takedown of botnets, the takedown of ransomware groups, something which sometimes, the US government goes after, try to, destabilize those networks or those sources. Anything on the Canadian side where there is some that kind of capabilities being looked at?
So really good question. I didn't dive into it at the beginning, but under the CSE Act, created in 2019, we have signals intelligence, we have foreign cyber operations, defensive cyber operations, and then technical authority for cybersecurity and information assurance. So signals intelligence, gathering intel for the country to fuel our operations. Foreign cyber operations and defensive cyber operations in foreign space, not in Canada. Entirely what you're saying. We do those. We don't talk about them. Sometimes we give high-level numbers in terms of what we've done, but incredibly active, growing, and funded by the Government of Canada. So we have some very skilled folk in that space. And that's the very nice thing about being at CSE. Having all three of those mandates in one organization makes you incredibly agile in terms of what you can do. We can see something happen in Canada, get the signals intelligence for exactly why it happened and who might be doing it, and then have the foreign cyber operations capability to take action without telling Canadians, unfortunately. Right? So yes, we have that capability. Yes, we do stuff. Yes, we work with our partners as well in those partner operations, but we're certainly not forthcoming with details in that space, but we do it. We do it. Canada's working hard at that, I would say.
Hi there. You mentioned mis and disinformation, and certainly there's been a lot of controversy around blocking that type of information. Certainly during COVID, there was some important voices that were silenced, and some information has come out since. How is it that we can do it as cybersecurity professionals, ensure that there is still that ability for divergent voices to be heard while blocking the amplification, the use of tools, bots, etc., and blocking the information? It's like that whole, better to let 1,000 people walk free than have one guilty person go to jail kind of situation.
Yeah, I think you described it well, right? I mean, we're a cybersecurity organization, so we point out some of those techniques that are being used, some of the AI, synthetic content generation, where you can, generate content so easily that it's believable. So that's the manifestation of the problem. We are a free and open democratic society, and we want free flow of information. So we're not the regulator of information on the internet, and we never want to be. We're cybersecurity, and that's what we'll tell people to do. We'll tell people about the threats. We'll tell people that foreign cyber threat actors are actually deliberately using these techniques to sow misinformation, and we can even give examples of some of these things that are happening. But there's a variety of answers there that are all fairly complex. But I mean, we always start with education of people, knowing that you have to be a discerning consumer of information nowadays. Don't believe what you're reading. Go to multiple sources. What are the ways that you can actually produce that and use your own judgment? That's probably the most liberal way of doing it. I mean, I'm not a regulator of information, but that's kind of what we say, right? You really have to, do that second guess on most of the information you are and be a very discerning consumer. At the same point in time, we do want to share the things that you've said as well. This is what's happening. These are the technologies that are being used. There is synthetic voice, there's synthetic video, there's these social botnets amplifying false narratives. They're happening nonstop, and there are countries actually trying to do this on a regular basis. Important to recognize, how do you use that yourself while consuming information is something that, it occurs in the brain, and people have to, put that lens on while looking at information, in the absence of other sorts of things like watermarking and, validating, provenance and these sorts of things that are going to take a bit longer, although there are efforts by companies in terms of doing that. So yeah, it's an evolving landscape with no immediate solution.
Sorry, right over here. How's that? Next time. Question for you: how can you leverage this federal organization here to change the attitude? And I would say in banks and insurance. So if you go to report fraud to your bank, they don't care. They'll just write it off for insurance, or your insurance will cover something. It seems like whenever you report an actual fraud case, it's not dealt with there. Can you have any leverage to enforce teeth on some of legislation or a standard that way?
No, so I'll talk about what we can do, and then I'll talk a little hypothetically about some other things. But from our point of view, in terms of enforcing standards, that's like banks or other critical infrastructure. That's in terms of protecting their infrastructure, and we're waiting for C26 and other regulations to come out. Right now, banks are pretty well regulated for cyber as well, so there's lots of kind of cybersecurity regulations in terms of them protecting their own data. When it gets to fraud, and I think you're almost speaking to incentives, right? So when something happens, what's the incentive to actually take action on something, or just to pay out a claim, or to let it happen? What we've seen in cybersecurity is kind of a mismatch in market incentives. I mean, even if you look at everything that's on there, if you put out a flawed software product, I mean, whose problem is it really when someone gets compromised? I don't see the liability. Really, the onus is on most operators to go and patch the product, right? So it seems like the costs are being incurred by not the real originator of the problem. It's an emerging market, so I don't think the market forces have really evolved to the point where they're regulating the own market. And you look at that in terms of liability, in terms of regulation and legislation, just in terms of return on investment. There's a lot of these things that have to work themselves out, and if they don't, then governments will be stepping in to do different things. Not our organization; we're not policy. We're cybersecurity, but even like financial type organizations to figure out what is the real liability, where does it lie, and then some of what you said as well is the difficulty in terms of prosecution for some of this fraud as well, is that many of these cyber criminals occur. They're existing in areas that aren't actually open to easy law enforcement, right? They're outside the bounds of what can really be prosecuted in kind of these safe havens, which we flagged as well. So yet another type of, how do you shift the incentives on this to make sure that they're forced out in the marketplace? That's a huge effort that I think is slowly happening. Insurance is a really important one. We've seen insurance companies have pretty significant loss ratios when they first started insuring for cybersecurity. Then they lose money and they change what they do. So that maybe that's where the market is kind of working. And, you see some of the cyber insurance policies changing, but they're slowly evolving. So it's a whole evolving market where the incentives are still shaking out and not yet fully determined.
I have a question. Cyber Center is mostly focused in Ottawa. Do you have any plan to kind of move to some kind of one as a headquarter and then provincial offices, one in Alberta, BC? I don't know you're doing it or not, but secretly, but kind of is there any plan like that?
So super important, right? I mean, one of the things that we wanted to do is become a national organization. I mean, we work very closely with the provinces and territories. We want to build this federation, but we also want to know people in each of the areas. So we've been, traveling a lot. I've been to Calgary quite a bit in the last year. I've been here in Edmonton and all over the country. And you saw Sammy traveling a lot, and you've seen others traveling a fair bit. We have just recently, I will say, opened a pilot in Montreal. So our first kind of step to opening a different location for us. So we're kind of going through the logistics of how that's going to work, making sure we know how to do this as an organization. And then, yes, we do have plans to go to the rest of Canada, and it would be amazing, right? Because there's nothing like that. Having someone in the community, meeting all the people, like you look at the community that's been built here, fantastic. Knowing each other is really important. And I totally appreciate your question, and that it's important to have that presence, particularly, when you got a federal government sitting in Ottawa. Of course, they're in Ottawa. How do they get to the rest of Canada? It's a big country. So it's important to us. We've taken step one and looking to pursue that.
Hi. I have a question over here. Sorry. First, I wanted to say thank you for the harmonization for compliance. You had kind of noted that having to deal with different compliance frameworks, it's pretty awesome that at least there's someone who's taking this with a sense of sanity, given how many global requirements there are. But my question was more around the open source aspect of things. Full disclosure, I'm from Red Hat, so open source is my bread and butter. A lot of governments, industries, et cetera, look at open source still with a certain amount of risk. It's a little bit riskier to use, to say, proprietary software. I noticed, and I think it's super cool because I didn't know you did as much open source as you do. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into some of this. But what is your view, or say like the Canadian government's view on open source in terms of usability, risk, et cetera?
Well, I mean, you can make the argument in multiple different ways. As you can see, we're fans of open source, right? And open source leaves itself open to scrutiny and whatever security you want to apply to it. So that's our argument for open source. It's transparent, whereas other vendors aren't, right? So you can say, hey, it might not have the same software development team that others have testing, but at the same point in time, with some of the vulnerabilities we've seen from closed source vendors, it makes you wonder what testing goes on there as well. So I would say that open source for us is totally legit, and also provides this transparency and inspection that we think is important. It is one of the elements that we see in supply chain security. To that, I would also say that the internet runs on open source software. We saw Heartbleed a long time ago. We've seen OpenSSL, all these sorts of things. All of these vendors leverage open source as the core of what they really run. And these are multi-billion-dollar organizations. I don't know how much of that money from vendors really flows back into the testing and development and life cycle of the open source software that they rely on. So that's another one where those market incentives and the way the world works doesn't necessarily seem to make sense in some ways. Software has grown up over the past 4 decades or so. But open source is the fabric of the internet, right? And fabric of cloud environments, if you look at what's in there, as you know well, right? So for us, we think it's very important. Maybe there's an opportunity for us, you're looking at LLMs, you're looking at where we're getting into vulnerability discovery and automation. I think it's having the transparency of code and the ability to bang against it with analytic tools and vulnerability discovery processes is a good opportunity, and transparency is always appreciated. So, yeah.
Hi there. Can you tell us more about the cyber incident reporting, when we might be obligated to report something, especially outside the government and critical infrastructure space, and what sort of assistance you provide?
So amazing question. Thank you very much. We want to hear from people because, first of all, it lets us help you. And second of all, we will anonymize the information, and what we can share, we'll always ask you first. We want to share with everyone else as well to make the whole community stronger, right? And so very important to us. So we're not a regulator ourselves. So that's another thing I want to flag. We're here to help you from a cybersecurity perspective. Where regulation comes in is like, depending on what sector you're in, you might have regulatory obligations for that particular sector, for that regulator. But the overarching regulation that's coming in is Bill C-26, an act respecting cybersecurity, Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act. And that's going to be a schedule with some named critical infrastructure operators, and they will be obligated to report to the Cyber Center. So we're still going to, as soon as that act comes through, or if it does, we will be interviewing people. So we'll have a couple of years in terms of assessing what we'd really want in that mandatory incident reporting. Because we have seen mandatory incident reporting from a number of different elements from North America and others that have created different kinds of pressures on organizations to report something immediately, whereas we know that it takes a bit of time to actually understand what the real manifestation, like what the magnitude of an incident is. So we want to be reasonable in what that is. But really for that subset of organizations that are required to submit, there will be a mandatory incident report with some agreed upon content. And that would be shared with the regulator as well for the 4 regulated sectors federally, which are telecom, finance, energy, and transportation. Anything beyond that we were to work together if we were mitigating an incident wouldn't have to be shared with the regulator from us as a cyber center, because we're here to help. And if you share logs or something else, that's our property, and that's what we'd work with. But other than that, there's no regulatory obligation to report to the cyber center. It's voluntary. That's why we want to show value. So we want to work with you, and those are some of the services that you asked about. So right off the bat, we'll ask you, what the type of incident is. Our knowledge, you might say a ransomware strain. We might have seen that 10 times that week. You know what I mean? So we might know a lot about it. We might know what to look for. We might share some indicators back that we'd seen that other people have shared. Say, hey, have you looked for this? Have you looked for this? Others that had the same ransomware also found X, Y, and Z on their networks, right? So we try to give you that information initially. If it really grows and you're in a bad situation, then we do have that opportunity of, sending someone out there like an incident responder. Some organizations do need that structure because they haven't lived an incident, and the planning maybe was not as comprehensive as it might have been. So we'll send someone out, help them out, or sometimes they could just use the extra hands because these are big challenges, and we can send someone out, or we can send an expert in forensics or something like that to augment the team. That's the next level. Also, in terms of some incidents, if they're more significant, we do have a log intake service that is a request from you. So we can actually stream logs into our processing framework. We do that not super often, but if it's significant enough, we can do that. And then the very last edge of that is really, sensor deployment, which is under federal ministerial authorization and a request from the organization, which we have done for critical infrastructure in terms of really serious incident. But that's where we bring all of our tech and automated analytics, and really that's a significant effort and only happens very rarely. But other than that, going through the incident, but also looking at remediation, right? So if we look at it, we look at root cause, and we say, oh, by the way, here's a good way of mitigating this in the future. So we try to go through the whole life cycle with you, and then maybe sign you up if we haven't signed you up already. And then typically that starts with kind of an assessment survey, finding the strengths and weaknesses, and highlighting the best places to kind of invest in to lock yourself down from a threat perspective. So we don't just respond to the incident, we try to help you prepare for the next one as well. And then you'll hopefully be on our list for cyber flashes and threat indicators and all those other things from there on.
Well, have you looked toward engaging with the Internet Exchange throughout Canada, and what the United States that would like?
So you mean like the CIRA Internet Exchange points and yeah. Yep. Yeah, so we work with CIRA. There's 11 in Canada now. There used to only be a couple, so that's good. First of all, we got some diversity in there and some resiliency. So CIRA was really a kind of an initiator for all of that. So we do work with them, and work with some of the telcos that are located there as well. So that's in terms of sharing threat intelligence and making sure that they're as secure as possible as well. So, yeah. All right.